Hi, I'm Sheena Norquay and the name of my quilt is Stitching Through the Decades. Well, what inspired me to make it was the theme of the Quilters Guild challenge this year, and because I've been stitching for such a long time, I wanted to have a record of all the main pieces of work that I had done over the years. So that's how it came about. Well, I've used all sorts of techniques really, hand applique, machine quilting, machine piecing, all sorts of techniques really. Well, I started when I was a child in the 1960s, so these are actually doll's clothes that I made when I was about 7, I reckon. And so that was probably the remains of a skirt, either the top of a skirt or the cuff of a blouse, I'm not very sure. And I know that was the remains of an apron I made at school, maybe primary 3 or primary 4. And of course everybody in those days made the white cooking apron before they went to secondary school, and we all made lap bags and sewing bags with cross stitch on gingham. So that's that. And then this one is the 1970s. So most of us of my vintage started in the 70s with Laura Ashley patchwork packs, and so that was actually a piece I had left over from another project from the 1970s. And I also made lots of waistcoats and jackets towards the end of the 70s. I bought my first machine round about 1979, but it only lasted 2 years, and then I bought my first Bernina in 1983. But when I was at college I did embroidery as my main subject, so I was taught how to be expressive with threads. And so this is just a piece that I made I didn't actually make that piece at college, but I did a big wave at college, so that's to remind me of that. And of course there was all the Laura Ashley fabric packs, so these are samples of some of the fabrics I used and I still have. We were also taught how to do all the different embroidery stitches at college by hand, so that's to remind me of that. And this is my very first ever bed quilt. It wasn't actually a quilt because I didn't know how to quilt, so it was a mixture of old dressmaking fabrics, remnants from various mail order companies because there was no quilt shops in those days, and of course bits from Laura Ashley fabrics with the date. And then in the 1980s I bought my first Bernina, which was an 801 machine, which I used right up until 1998 for everything. And so I did lots of landscape jackets, so this is just a section of colours that I was using then. Whole cloth quilting I started round about 1980. I didn't know how to handle a whole quilt, so I did it in bits and sewed it back together again. Lots of hand applique, piecing, so I went through all the American blocks and did all the different applique designs. I took fabrics from the only mail order company in those days, Strawberry Fair Fabrics, so these are some of the Strawberry Fair fabrics. And then I started doing City and Guilds embroidery around about 1989, so these are some leftover pieces from there. When I bought my Bernina machine, I at the same time discovered that you could get such a thing as a walking foot and a darning foot. So this was to remind me of my first ever attempt at using the walking foot and then the darning foot for free machining. So that's the 80s. And then the 90s, I started doing large quilts, mostly pictorial quilts, mostly seascape quilts. So that's a section of one of the seascape quilts that I made at that time. I did one called a Greek quilt, which took me over 500 hours, all hand applique machine quilting. Various ones, Vincent van Gogh was the inspiration for this one. City and Guilds, I was doing all sorts of applique with silk. This was the remains of an Elizabethan sleeve that I made. I made a whole sleeve, so that was a leftover sample. I had 2 cats at that time, Garfield and Cuddles, so they got stitched into lots of different things. I did whole cloth free motion quilting in the 80s and early 90s. So this was done early 90s for the Quilters Guild exhibition. Another one which I called Baroque Babes, it won 3 prizes for machine quilting in the same year. Then on to the 2000s, I was experimenting with lots of different patterns and techniques, and especially free motion quilting. I was doing kaleidoscope designs, I was doing grid designs, I was starting to do printing, experimenting with different fabrics, dyeing with onion skins, doing challenges for the Quilters Guild, you know, for the European Quilt Association. This is one that Bernina have in their offices in London. That's a section, well, a small bit of you know, sample that I did for that one. So that was called Out of the Blue, and pearls are not, no, what was that one? Pearls are not only blue. And again, I was doing a bit more printing down here. And then in the 2010s, I discovered Aurifil thread, so I've been working with them since then, doing colour collections, so that was something new I was doing. And by this time I had won about 5 different Bernina machines, so I've got one set up for free motion quilting, one with a walking foot, another with a couching foot, so you know, I do a lot of different things. And so these are just, again, leftover fabrics that I had from various prize-winning quilts, you know, over the years. So again, I do a lot based on landscapes and Orkney, seascapes, printing, leaves, you know, from the natural world, birds and so on. So that kind of takes me up to roughly 2015. So that's a very brief run through of what the quilt's all about. Yes, I do, because, well, I think what gives me more of a buzz is when somebody comes up and says that it moved them in some way, you know, or it inspired them in some way. So that's the thing that gives me the buzz, rather than winning the prizes. It's when people come and actually say to me, or they email me, you know, to say, you know, that they enjoyed, you know, looking at the quilt, or, you know, it inspired them. Oh, very much so, yes, and it's so nice to see young quilters coming in and doing things, mostly, you know, online. It's different now, you know, you've got Instagram and you've got Facebook, so there's a new community of quilters coming in and, you know, doing modern quilts. So it's good that things are moving on and it doesn't stay the same, but things come around in circles, like hexagons, for instance, which we all started with. We thought we'd never use again once we discovered the machine, whereas now hexagons are coming back into fashion, and I think hand quilting will come back as well, you know, so it's very exciting seeing what everybody's doing, and shows like this, you know, showcase quilts from all over the world, so I enjoy seeing that, and I'm inspired by seeing other people's work, and it's so nice that they're so different.